Hello and welcome to Long Beaching with Mo. Thank you for joining us this evening. And never say that things are not happening in the city of Long Beach, because we have a visitor today, and the name of that visitor is an artist called David Clayton. Hello David, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
I'd like to thank you for coming in today and showing us what you do for a living. Now, a friend of mine, George Saren, a mutual friend of yours, George, phoned up and said, I have a friend coming over from England, and he's an iconographer. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
I
Iconographer.
did. And what does an iconographer do, David?
Well, I paint icons, which is the art now of the Eastern Church, the Christian Church. Although it was the art of all the church up to about 1000 AD. And what it does, it portrays man in heaven, united with God in heaven.
Right.
And so it's very, very stylized, and it's actually showing people as a source of light, so there's no shadow or very little shadow. And we'll talk a little bit later, I guess, but one of the features is that there's no glint on the eye, for example, that when you see a glint on somebody's eye,
right,
that's because it's reflected light. But when we're in heaven, according to the descriptions of the book of Revelation, we're a source of light. Light is shining out of us.
Oh, so light is shining from within?
From within, from the person.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, how long have you been doing this for?
Something like 10 years I've been painting, and 5 years in earnest, I would say. Right. I struggled at first to get anyone to teach me. It was very, very difficult. So
what made you decide this is what I want to do in life?
Well, I'd always wanted to paint, and what happened to me was that I converted. I'm a Catholic, and I wanted to try and find a way of making my faith, the art, work for my faith, and I didn't really know what to do. And iconography was the one Christian tradition that was still alive in art, so that's what I went to first.
Now, I always thought that iconography was more of the Russian art form of you have the little paintings with the little folds of the Madonna, right?
Yes.
And is that part of what?
Oh, it is. And
teach?
One of the greatest iconographers is someone who lived in the 14th century, I think, called Andrei Rublev, who is a Russian, and he set the style for the Russian church. But it's also the art of the Greek Orthodox Church.
Okay.
And so nowadays it's mostly either the Greek icons or Russian icons. But each of those, for example, the Slavonic countries where there's Orthodox Christianity,
yes,
will have their own versions of icons. So
you
get
really?
even Ethiopian Coptic icons. For example.
What's a Coptic icon?
Well, the Copts are the Christians from ancient Ethiopia, who traditionally were the conversion of Ethiopia is mentioned in the Bible. So the church was established there very, very early on, and there's been a strain of that's existed all the way through.
Yes,
and it's called Coptic Christianity. So it's the type of that church, and they have their own particular style of iconography.
Wow, it's amazing,
yes.
Because I read a piece that George sent me on the computer, and it said something to do about egg yolks and pigment.
Oh, well, the way that you paint is that you actually use the pigment. All paint is just something which gives it colour.
Right.
So, for example, yellow ochre is actually dug up out of the ground. It's
so
soil.
It's a powder form?
It's a powder, yeah. It's the raw pigment. And then the problem then is to try and get it to stick to the surface. So in oil paint you use, predominantly linseed oil. In egg tempera, which is what you paint icons with, you use egg yolk. And so you actually put it into a little bit of egg yolk and rub it around so that it becomes tempered, it becomes suspended in the egg yolk.
Yes.
And you make a paste out of it. And then you add water, you dilute with water once it's in the egg yolk.
So is that each separate colour you do and you put in the egg yolk?
Yes, you can mix colours like you can with normal paint. So you might mix the powder first, or then sometimes you mix the different paints and then add one to the other.
Because you're over here on a mission, right, so to speak. What is your mission?
Well, we've set up schools in Oxford. I come from England and I live in Oxford.
I did notice an accent there.
Which is similar to yours, I guess. And I'm actually trying to promote the schools. I'm hoping that Americans will want to go over and spend a month in Oxford learning to paint icons.
Well, who wouldn't? I mean, Oxford, for goodness sakes, that's a nice little place.
It's a beautiful town. And we're teaching iconography, but also I was trained in Florence as a portrait painter. And so we teach that as well. And the thing about training as a portrait painter is just a very, very rigorous training in drawing.
Yes.
Which actually is applicable to any other art form. The drawing is the basic skill.
Really?
Yes. So even if you want to paint icons, it helps to be a good naturalistic drawer.
Were you always good at art at school?
Well, the way I put it is, my mum always thought I was good, my mother, but...
But then you thought, oh, Mum's always say you're good, even if you're not.
So I wondered whether... I didn't really know, is the answer. But it's something that I always wanted to do, but I wasn't encouraged at school particularly, because it wasn't an academic subject.
Right.
And I actually went to university and I studied sciences. I did materials science.
That's right, metallurgy?
Metallurgy.
Now, is that different? What is metallurgy?
Well, it's the study of metals. It's like the physics of solids, metallurgy and science of materials. And I did that in Oxford for my undergraduate, and then I did a master's in engineering in Michigan, actually.
Wow, of all the places on earth.
And after that, returned to England, thought, what do I do now?
Right.
And I was offered a job at a nuclear power station as a research scientist, and I didn't fancy that. So in the end, I just thought, well, I'm going to try and be an artist. And I just started doing evening classes.
So all this actually stemmed from evening classes. How long ago?
Oh, I made the decision something like 18 years ago.
Okay.
And I just persevered and persevered. Yeah. And what happened is I gradually got an idea of what I wanted to do. Right. And I wanted to really produce art that matched the glories of the past for the church. And so I started to look around for a school to train at, and I realised that it didn't exist. And so I felt that in the end, what I was going to have to do is found the school and then enlist as its first pupil.
Oh, okay.
So
good idea.
I started to travel around and look for the teachers.
Yes.
But I couldn't find people teaching precisely what I wanted to do, or it was very difficult. Yeah. And so eventually I found one or two people, but there was no way they were all going to come to me. So, and they were very reluctant to teach me at first.
Why was that?
Well, because a lot of them are working artists and they don't have time.
Okay.
That my icon teacher is an Orthodox Christian, and he tended to focus predominantly on Orthodox Christians to pass the tradition on.
Okay.
I'm a Catholic. But as soon as I said, well, I want to learn this so I can teach others, then they opened their doors to me and started to teach me. Right. And at that point I realised that probably I was going to have to be the one who not only enlisted its first pupil, but was its first teacher as well.
Right.
So gradually I picked up these skills, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. Done a lot of training.
That's amazing. So people can come to Oxford to your school.
Yes, yes.
And how long do they have to come to Oxford for?
Well, what we've done for the summer programme, we have 3 5-day classes in each of these disciplines.
Right.
And so it's possible, we've designed it so that you could just do one class in each, or you could do an integrated programme of 1 week of iconography, 2 weeks of naturalistic drawing.
Okay.
And then at the end of it, everyone comes together.
Yes.
And we have a short course in sacred geometry, which is traditional proportion and compositional design, based upon sacred number and musical harmonies, the golden mean.
I've heard of all that, and I have a friend, Alan, who's into especially the sacred numbers and everything. So now a lot of people, it's not an easy thing to describe, isn't it? Is it in layman's terms?
No, but I'll have a go.
Have a go. Go on.
Okay. Well, I think the easiest thing to think about is that the seasons, there are rhythms of life.
Right.
So very obviously 4 seasons. Just the simple fact that there is a year after 365 days when the Earth goes round the sun once.
Right.
Indicates a rhythm of life that
Yes.
man has to live according to.
Right.
And the lunar months, for example, the reason we have months are because we look at the phases of the moon.
Right.
And so people started to observe these patterns and changes in the world and attribute special significance to them, because after all, if you want to be able to imagine there are no shops. We're living 100,000 years ago.
Yes.
You need to know when you're going to plant seeds, when you're going to
Right.
harvest.
Yeah.
And so you're counting the days. An additional sign, of course, would be you'd look to the heavens and look at the constellations. And so they started to look at the stars, and they would see other rhythms and changes in the constellations in the sky. And so you get significant numbers. So the four seasons in the year, the four
Right.
corners of the earth,
Yeah.
represents the earth. And that would be represented in a square.
Yes.
3, particularly for a Christian, has great significance because of the Trinity, the Father, Son and the Holy Spirit, and that can be represented as a triangle.
And also a pyramid.
And a pyramid. And if you look at compositions, for example, there's a very famous painting of the Transfiguration by Raphael,
Yeah.
and he has all the earthly elements, the apostles, drawn within a square,
Yes.
and then you have the two prophets and Christ within a triangle. And so the
Oh.
composition is done to represent the spiritual and the earthly. And so they thought about this when they designed the painting. So you actually, if you look at it, it looks quite strange once you notice it, that Christ is upright and the two prophets are leaning in towards him to define the sides of the triangle. And there are other things, such that it was Pythagoras, actually, the ancient Greek,
Yes.
noticed that if you had a piece of string of a certain length and you
Yeah.
pluck a note,
Yes.
if you then had a string half the length and you pluck it, you have an octave difference.
Right.
And then you get certain harmonic relationships of 2/3, I think, is a perfect fourth, and 3/4 is a perfect fifth.
Okay.
A musician, I'm sure, could correct me. But it was assumed, therefore, that if there was an aural harmony,
Yes.
that there would be a visual harmony if you used these lengths in design. So all architecture, up to about 1900, used these proportions of 2/3, 3/4 and a half. And there are other relationships, but that allows you to link these numbers in harmonic relationships and produce beautiful buildings. Just the proportions of a painting, for example,
Right.
could be made according to this.
Wow.
And it's a tradition which was very firmly established up until about 200 years ago, and then it became detached from its Christian roots. And eventually, about 1900, all buildings stopped being made, for example, using this method. That's why modern cities look very different from older cities.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, have you been to see the church in Los Angeles there, the new church?
Do you know, I haven't, no.
Just off of the 101 freeway there. I'd be interested to see what you think of that.
Do you think I'd like it, or do you think I wouldn't?
It's very modernistic. I think.
Well, I may.
That's my own personal view of it. But also, we do have, as you would teach, in fact, we do have it in art form that we took earlier, some stills, which you could talk us through them right now,
Okay,
because because I'm being told I only have a certain amount of time, and I would love to spend more time with you. But
so this is just an icon of
yes.
a Greek called Saint Silouan the Athonite. He's called an Athonite because he lived in Mount Athos about 100 years ago, and he came to England and founded a monastery.
Okay.
He's an ascetic, which means that he denied himself the pleasures of life, so he's drawn as an old man and having a wrinkled face. This is Christ. It's a very traditional image that's on the cloth that would have touched his face during the Passion.
Right.
And you can see there no glint in the eyes.
Yes.
The expression there is what they call bright sadness. He's contented, but he's also aware of the suffering in the world. And the way that you draw that is you have one rounded, happy eyebrow, if you like, and one that's looking slightly stern.
Oh.
And it produces this slightly enigmatic expression.
Right. Interesting. And the paintings around you, of course, they're paintings that you have done.
Yes.
And now, what do we have up on the screen right now?
Well, this is part of the training to produce the portraits which we saw. So you always start by doing drawing of cast. So that's a plaster cast which you set up.
Yes.
Because there's no worry about colour then, and it's done in charcoal.
Yes.
And you spend a long time getting it right. That might have been 5 weeks of mornings.
Ah.
You speed up in time. You can't spend that long once you paint somebody.
So now you say 5 mornings, meaning how many hours per morning?
Three per morning.
3 hours per
Yes.
morning.
Yeah.
Wow. What's the next one we have?
So that's another cast drawing, very similar. By this stage, I'd speeded up. That took me a week, I think.
Ooh, getting...
Much looser as well. You can see... Things to notice are things such as the edges are blurred.
Yeah.
Here's a portrait. So you then move on to black and white, still in charcoal, but looking at the figure.
Yes.
And so you're drawing from nature. And you spend most of your time telling the model to, chin up as
Aww.
she sags. But again, there's no worry about colour there, so you stay
Right.
with the charcoal.
Okay. Do you find that it's... Oh,
there we go. So then you go on to pastel, which is chalk, but coloured chalk.
Oh.
And you can see now it's an additional problem. Not only are you thinking in terms of light and shade,
Right.
but also the colour, you're trying to represent the colour of the skin.
Yes.
The reason the shadow is there, by the way, is that in the West, rather than trying to show people in heaven, they started to be interested in people on earth.
Okay.
And the shadow is part of the visual vocabulary that shows the presence of suffering and evil.
Right.
And it's always contrasted with the light. So in this portrait here, the studio is set up so that you have a single light high up.
Yes.
And it casts this very deep shadow. And the light, of course, is the light of the world, the Christ. So symbolically, it's saying that although life isn't perfect on earth, there's always hope. It's transcended by the hope in Christ. And this style was developed in the 17th century in Italy.
Yeah, because as I was saying to you, it looked very... There's some aspects of it that look Dutch to me, from a great Dutch artist.
Yes, it was developed in as part of the Counter-Reformation in Italy. But a lot of art went through Amsterdam, and Rembrandt, for example, we know owned huge amounts of this, and he based his style on what he saw coming from Italy. Always in the oil style, you focus on the eyes. They're the light of the soul.
Yeah.
And you want somebody to be looking at the eyes of the person to get a sense that they're alive. And so most of the detail is painted in the eyes, and a little bit in the mouth and perhaps the hands.
Right.
Everything else is done very loosely. And very, very loose brushwork.
But most of the focus, as you say, now look, we're just showing this one here, and it came in from the eye and is going out now. So you put
a huge amount of time spent on getting the eyes right. The eyebrows are what generate the expression.
Oh.
And things like you don't want to be studying, for example, as we look at it there, the left-hand side of his cheek. So you just blur that into the background. It's not clearly defined. You want them looking at the eyes. When they look.
We have another eye of the lady, I believe, that they're going to bring out. Oh, no,
this is Christ.
Yeah.
So you see there, no glint in the eye, because Christ is a source of light. So he won't have any reflected light on him, and that's part of the iconic tradition.
Yes.
Very much more based on line rather than tone in the Eastern tradition. You're hatching with lines a great deal, so using drawing skills.
The angel wings too, they tend to be blend together with
the
artwork there. Okay, I'm looking for the... Now, didn't we have a close-up? Was there a close-up done of...
Here we go, of the lady,
Yes, that was
Jane was her name.
Now, what do you look for in the model? Do you walk along the street and say, hey, I like your eyebrows, let me paint you?
Well, you can do, but for the most part, you were just so desperate to get somebody to learn as you were going along.
Really? That surprises me.
She was the girlfriend of one of the other students.
Okay.
And so we just grabbed her and...
Fantastic. Now, do you sell these works of art that you have?
Well, yes, I would, but I generally wait till I get commissions, because... It involves a lot of work, particularly the iconographic work. Even a small one might take a month to do.
Right.
And because you have to prepare the panels, you paint on something called gesso, which is this polished, smooth plaster, which you put onto the wood. And so it's about the same amount of work to do one that's a foot square as 3 feet square.
Oh, my goodness.
So I would rather wait until I get a commission for a big one. But I do sell what I do, yeah.
Yeah. Now, when people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Well, we have a website, and probably the best way is through that. Shall I give you the address?
Yes, do indeed.
OK, so it's www.resource.co.uk, and resource is spelt with 2 S's, so it's RESSOURCE.
And I think we do have it. Oh, yep, look at that. We have it up on the screen. And I think we even had it on your T-shirt too. You know, because you're over here. Now, you're over here for a couple of weeks in America.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you're going around teaching the art form so people can get onto the website and actually look at where you are and...
Yes, a little bit of teaching and talking, doing a number of talks and just trying to make people aware of what we do.
Now, do you come back, are you going to be coming back to America every year or every 2 years?
Yes, I'd like to. I'd like to. I mean, my hope really is to try and establish something here. Obviously, it's easier to bring one person over here than 30 people over to Oxford. I think many people would like to go to Oxford, but I'm very open to the idea that maybe a group will form over here.
Okay.
And I very much like coming to the US, and my brother lives in California actually, so I've got very good reasons to visit regularly, and I like doing it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I really thank you. I wish we had more time, but I think our 15 minutes are up.
Okay.
And I thank you very much, David Clayton, for coming in and talking to us and giving us a little bit of an insight on what you do, because it's another form of artistry that I had no idea about until George turned me on to you. So thank you very much for coming in.
All right. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.